This is Module 1.2, and we'll be talking about the idea of opportunity costs and the production possibility frontier. The production possibility frontier captures the allocation of scarce resources in an economy between the production of two goods. We know that all economies have scarce resources, and they need to decide what to do with those scarce resources when they're trying to produce different types of goods in the economy. Because we have a limited amount of resources, we can't produce an infinite amount of goods. So when we produce more of one good, that means that we have to sacrifice the production of another good. So let's look at this example of the production possibility frontier. As you can see here, this graph is illustrating what we call the PPF curve, or the production possibility frontier curve. Now, here you can see that we have two goods. We have good X and good Y. This is representing the quantity of good X and the quantity of good Y that an economy can produce. In the production possibility frontier, we're assuming that the economy is only producing two goods. Now, this is a simplifying assumption, simply to make this analysis of allocation of scarce resources a little bit easier to digest. We know that economies actually produce millions and millions of different types of goods, but if we simplify our assumption in the production of two goods, then it's a little bit easier for us to make this analysis. Also, the production possibility frontier represents a snapshot in time of production, meaning that if an economy chooses a point of production, it doesn't mean it has to stick with that point of production forever. It can change how much of good X and good Y it is producing in the next time period. Also, what we're assuming is that our limited resources can be used in the production of both goods, so that both good X and good Y can use all of the resources that an economy has. Now, an important point here is that, as you can see, the PPF curve is bowed out. What this is telling us is that, in fact, yes, limited resources can be used in the production of both goods, but some of those resources are going to be a little bit better at producing good X, and some resources are going to be a little bit better at producing good Y. Hence why the PPF curve is bowed out. Now, any point along the PPF curve is what we call an efficient point of production. So a point such as point A, telling us we're using all of our resources for the production of good X, is as efficient as point B, where we're using all of our resources to produce only good Y, as well as point C, where we're using all of our resources to produce some combination of good X and good Y. So any point along the PPF curve tells us that we're producing both good X and good Y, some combination of them, and we're using all of our resources to do so. Now, a point such as point D on our PPF curve is what we call inefficient, because we're not using all of our resources to produce good X and good Y. If we simply employ more of our resources, we can produce more of good Y, or more of good X, or some combination of good X and good Y. A point such as point E would be impossible. We simply don't have enough resources to produce this combination of good X and good Y. To get to point E, we would need more resources in our economy. So let's look at a numerical example here to understand the PPF a little bit more. Here, let's consider an economy that's producing only two goods, leather jackets and leather boots. On this table, you can see the production combinations of boots and jackets at each point. With this table, what we want to do is draw the PPF curve for this economy, labeling each of the points. We want to calculate the change in the number of boots and number of jackets as we move along each point and along the PPF curve. And we want to understand, what is this telling us in terms of opportunity costs? So let's get started. So here you can see the table that's telling us how many boots and how many jackets we can produce with our limited resources. At point A, we're producing no boots and all jackets, 100 jackets. As we move from point A to point B, we're producing a little bit more boots, but that means that we have to give up some of those jackets in production. From point B to point C, again, producing more boots, but slightly less jackets. C to D, again, more boots, but less jackets. And point D to point E, now we're producing only boots and no jackets at point E. So now what you can notice is that as we produce more boots, that's telling us that we have to produce less jackets. So the opportunity cost to produce additional boots is going to be how many jackets we have to give up to move from one point to the next. So let's calculate that change. As we move from point A to B, we're producing 20 more boots, but we're giving up 10 jackets. As we move from point B to point C, again, producing 20 more boots, but now we have to give up 20 jackets. As we move from point C to point D, again, producing 20 more boots, but now we're giving up 30 jackets for those additional 20 boots. From point D to point E, again, 20 more jackets, but now we're giving up, we're 20 more boots, and now we're giving up 40 jackets. So what this is telling us is that our opportunity cost along the PPF curve is going to change. Specifically, as we can see here, the opportunity cost rises as we give up more of the good that is scarce. As we're moving, let's say, from point D to point E, where we're increasing by 20 boots, notice that the cost in terms of how many jackets we have to give up is going to be high. 40 jackets we have to give up to get to point E. So that opportunity cost to get additional boots at point E is going to be high in terms of the amount of jackets that we have to give up. On the other hand, the opportunity cost is going to be lower when the good is relatively abundant. Here, what we're talking about is moving from point A to point B. We have a lot of jackets and no boots. So to produce more boots, the opportunity cost in terms of jackets that we have to give up is relatively low, especially if we compare this, the movement from A to B compared to the movement from D to E, where here jackets are scarce, and here, jackets are abundant. So now we want to talk about what happens when we have shifts in the PPF curve. Shifts in the PPF curve are going to come specifically from a change in available resources. Now remember, we were saying that we can use all of our resources in the production of both goods. But some resources are going to be slightly better at producing one good versus the other. In this example, let's think about what happens if we have a shortage of rubber. What happens in the boots industry and what happens in the jackets industry? Well, we know that rubber is used relatively heavily in the production of boots and not as heavily in the production of jackets. So what we assume is that the boots industry is going to be affected more than the jackets industry because of the shortage in rubber. So a shortage of rubber is going to cause a biased shift in of the PPF curve in terms of the amount of boots that we can produce. At each production point, because we have less rubber, we can produce less boots. Jackets are going to be affected slightly, not as much as the boots industry will. So when we have a shift in the PPF curve, we need to decide, is the change in resources affecting both industries equally, or is one industry affected more than the other? With the shortage in rubber, we see that the production of boots is affected relatively more than the production of jackets, and therefore we have a biased shift of the PPF curve. If instead the shortage came in, for example, workers, then a shortage in workers would affect both the boots industry as well as the jackets industry, and we would have an equal shift in of the PPF curve. So again, if we're talking about shifts in the PPF curve, they have to come specifically from changes in resources or from changes in technology that would make our resources more productive. Thanks so much for joining me in this module 1.2 on the production possibility frontier.